Greetings, The Rings of Power, Season 2, Breakdown and Reaction for Episode 6. In this episode, we visit pretty much every storyline except for Isildur and Theo in Pelargir, so I wonder what they're up to. This episode begins as Arondir is racing through the forest where he stumbles upon some deserting orc soldiers. After a brief fight, Arondir kills these orcs and discovers that they were holding a map of Eregion. I love that the story is continuing to go into the kind of emotional lives of orcs. Even in The Lord of the Rings, we have orcs who don't want to go to war. And I think the idea of orcs being willing to desert and leave the company, risking it all, and they're like, anything's better than dying in war. Like, that's so true. I don't want to die in war either. Now let's move over to Rhûn, which we did not get to see last episode, so it's been a while. In Rhûn, the stranger is troubled by visions of Nori in peril. He is distracted from his destiny, as described by Bombadil, feeling like Nori urgently needs him to find her. While still in the house of Tom Bombadil, the stranger has an interesting conversation with him about mastering the secret fire. He says, "How do I learn to master its power?" And Bombadil says, "What does the secret fire need with you as its master?" I thought this dialogue was really great because in The Lord of the Rings, Gandalf refers to himself as a servant of the secret fire, not its master. So I can assume there will be some lessons learned along the way for our not Gandalf that we can, basically assume is Gandalf at this point. Bombadil explains that the stranger must not fail the trial that is before him now, because apparently he's failed all of the other ones before, so I feel kind of bad for him. But he has to follow Tom Bombadil, who's going to show him what he's got to do. Tom brings the stranger out to the desert to find his staff, apparently. Gosh, this reminded me a little too much of like Harry Potter, where the wizard has to go to the wand store and find his wand, and, it's going to light up and make his hair blow all around, and I'm not looking forward to that moment. I fear it will be cheesy. But so there's this valley filled with tons and tons of like dead or dead-ish trees with all kinds of branches for the taking. So apparently this is like the place you go to when you want to claim your staff, which makes me wonder, like, how many wizards are there supposed to be in this world? There are like 100 trees. The stranger is distracted, though, in this moment because even though he feels like he's got to do whatever Bombadil's telling him, he's so scared for Nori. And then Bombadil responds, "Many that die deserve life. Some that live deserve death. Who are you to give it to them?" And I hated that they are retconning this line to be wisdom that Gandalf learned from Bombadil. I've always believed that this was wisdom that Gandalf learned from Nienna while in Valinor. And to take it and give it to Bombadil, that was a hard moment. Anyways, Bombadil explains that Sauron rises in the west, the dark wizard, the dark wizard, the dark wizard in the east, and every soul in Middle-earth is in peril. Will you abandon them to their doom? Basically, he tells the stranger he has a choice. Essentially, he's got to choose between finding Nori or his quote-unquote destiny. My guess is that he's going to choose Nori to emphasize the power of friendship, because we know in The Lord of the Rings that Gandalf says we should trust to friendship. Meanwhile, in the store camp, Nori is discussing the Harfoot way of migration with Gundabel as it stands in contrast with the consistency of the Stoor's way of life. Poppy and Merrimack, meanwhile, are completely smitten with each other, and then they kiss in this kind of cute little scene. Later, Nori is considering turning herself into the little Mad Max guys who are chasing her. But she discusses with Poppy how important the stranger is and how important it is to fight for the stuff you love. So they decide to fight against the Dark Wizard's forces. How they are going to do this, I have no idea. Back in Numenor, Elendil is tried for incitement of violence and high treason before Pharazôn and the king's men. He is threatened with a sentence of death and then offered freedom from it if he were to recant his crimes and beliefs. Elendil will not renounce Miriel as Numenor's true ruler, so Belzegar suggests that they try Elendil using an old method that the faithful used to use, saying, Perhaps we should let the Valar decide his fate. If the faithful want to live by the old traditions, they ought to die by them as well. This scene was so reminiscent of the scene in Game of Thrones when Ned Stark is killed as his daughters watch. Though thankfully it ends in a better situation. Kemen continues to act like a brat and is clearly following a King Joffrey sort of character arc. Elendil is thrown into prison, where he is first visited by Eregion, who begs him to swear fealty to Pharazôn. She's crying a lot in this scene. It was pretty moving. She asks her father to swallow his pride, to which he responds, "If after all this, all you see is pride, then there are no words left for us to speak." Because she feared Elendil would not heed her counsel, she brings in Miriel, who also tries to persuade him to bow to Pharazôn. Miriel says, "If Numenor is to endure, it needs men like you. Men who will champion all that is precious, men of faith." Elendil says, "Faith is not faith if it is not lived. And in my heart, I know you are this kingdom's true heir. I cannot deny that knowledge. Were I to do so, I would cease to be the man you wish to save." He also says, "I would rather die with a heart that is whole than live with one broken by cowardice," which is that's a good line. Then Miriel, though, she's like, "What of my heart?" They are so in love. I think they should just kiss already. Then Elendil is like, "Well, if it's the will of the Valar that my life be spared, then it will be." And Miriel is like, "What if it isn't?" She's stressed out. And then, oh my gosh, Elendil says, "The sea is always right." That was a rough moment because I feel like the dialogue there was so good to end that really emotional conversation with the infamous "sea is always right" line. Later on, Elendil is brought out to the coast for his sea trial. Pharazôn asks him, "Do you forsake all earthly authority and accept the judgment of the Valar?" Which I can see a little bit of foreshadowing in that line. And Elendil responds that he does. But before he can be taken into the water, Miriel arrives and she offers to endure the sea trial in his stead. Elendil is obviously distraught and doesn't want that to happen, but Miriel insists. She says it must be me who takes the first step. Miriel is led into the water to await the sea worm, which has been summoned like the worms in Dune, and it drags her deep into the ocean. The worm basically takes a good look at her and then roars at her and then delivers her back to the surface, so it's like a 30-second ordeal. And she is declared innocent. The crowd names her Tar Miriel, Queen of the Sea. Pharazôn is unsettled by this whole ordeal, and he returns to the Palantir where he gets a vision. He sees magma kind of moving around. I'm assuming it's Mount Doom, the Eye of Sauron, and Halbrand turning and looking back at him in the forge. Now let's discuss the orc camp where Galadriel and Adar are on a date. Okay, I'm sorry, they're not really on a date. We return to the orc camp where Adar has set out this really beautiful Beauty and the Beast dinner for himself and Galadriel. No one's eating it though, which is a bummer because some of it looks pretty good. They discuss Sauron's manipulation techniques and seem to have a little bonding moment of sorts over it, however short-lived. Adar says, "During my brief time in your capture, you seemed intent on finding Sauron. One might even say consumed by it, the way one always is, once he has wormed his way inside your mind." This is kind of an interesting way to put it because it almost hints to some sort of interaction between Galadriel and Sauron even before the death of Finrod. Her obsession with finding Sauron has lasted over 1,000 years, even though she only knew Halbrand for a couple of months. Galadriel says, "You know nothing of my mind. You yielded to him. I resist." Okay, girl. Adar says, "For a while, perhaps, but sooner or later he sees you. Not just who you are, but who you wish to be. His eye bores a hole and the rest of him slithers in. For a while, he even makes you believe that his power has become yours. For a while, he even makes you believe that his power has become yours. Irresistible power that makes every desire's fulfillment seem inevitable." And then Adar's like, "With Sauron, the world is full of all these vibrant colors, and without him it's..." And then Galadriel's like, "A dull gray." So I think she's missing him a little bit. Galadriel admits that Sauron had promised her an army To Adar, Sauron promised children. I don't know what that means, but it's kind of interesting. Galadriel says, "Then it would seem he gave us both what we desired." And Adar responds, "You see, it is not his lies which must be extinguished, it is him." Adar proposes that they fight together to destroy Sauron, and he brings out the crown of Morgoth that we saw in episode 1. He still has it. He explains that Sauron refired the crown of Morgoth to fit himself after Morgoth's defeat. Adar hopes that the power of the Elven Rings alongside Morgoth's crown can perhaps destroy Sauron forever. I don't understand what this could possibly mean unless the crown is made out of some kind of special metal or has some sort of special powers connected to it, but we haven't really seen much of the sort up until now. I don't really understand how the crown and the rings would work together. It's kind of interesting that the crown used to bear 3 Silmarils, and now he's like, maybe we can use your 3 rings to somehow make this work. Adar convinces Galadriel to basically tell him everything. She divulges that Halbrand is Sauron, and great job, Galadriel, she tells him the location of her ring. Galadriel agrees that they should work together to fight against Sauron. But then he's like, well, what happens afterwards? He says, "And what then? I meant, what then for the Uruk? Will your High King permit us to return home in peace? Or will he proceed with his plans to invade Mordor?" Then he tells Galadriel, "The shadow has not only overcome you, it has overcome all Elvendom. In the end, your drive to prove your virtue will work right into Sauron's designs." Adar then shows Galadriel his army of orcs, and boy, are there a ton of them. He also tells Galadriel that she has unwittingly revealed everything he had hoped and more, and she basically freaks out and pleads with Adar not to destroy Eregion, but he orders her to be held. He says, "Now that you have confirmed beyond any doubt who he is and told me who carries your ring, Eregion will fall, and Sauron with it." Galadriel responds, "Sauron has no army of his own, so he has lured yours here instead. He wants you to attack Eregion. Do not take his lure." Adar is kind of being a little bit prideful. He says, "I will make him choke on it." So for some reason, he feels very confident now that he will be able to kill Sauron once and for all, even though it didn't work last time. In Khazad-dûm, the dwarves are mining overtime and laying these gigantic piles of gold before the king's feet. Essentially, he is suffering from dragon sickness due to the ring, and I think this might be some sort of nod to the Hobbit movies, maybe. Annatar has arrived in Khazad-dûm to plead with the dwarves for more mithril. His request is denied by King Durin, so he leaves Khazad-dûm, but he's very mad. There's a moment where he looks into this fire and he either foresees a Balrog or maybe he's summoning the Balrog. I'm not totally sure. After Annatar leaves, Durin the Younger asks his father to take off the ring. Durin says no, and then hits his son, and Durin the Younger flies across the room. Later, Durin takes counsel with his wife, Disa, who says that the king is not himself. They kind of debate over whether or not they should try to overthrow the king, but Durin is very upset by this idea because he doesn't want to humiliate his father or disrespect him at all. Disa says he'll destroy himself and take this kingdom with him, so they kind of have to figure out a plan moving forward. Later, we see Narvi is leading miners to the dig site, and Disa is blocking their path. She does some resonating, which at first looks like she's just standing there yelling, and then it turns out she's summoning a whole bunch of bats, which scare the miners, and they run away. Our last storyline for this episode is Eregion, where things are really cooking and starting to get pretty dark. So the rings are not cooperating as Celebrimbor is trying to forge them, and he is getting upset. He is acting totally obsessed and crazy. There's a mess everywhere. He's kind of acting like someone who is hyper-focused on a certain project, and then there's kind of chaos everywhere. The forge kind of looks like my desk right now, which I have some thoughts about. Celebrimbor demands more mithril, but Meridiania tells him they've run out because the dwarves have not delivered any more. So Celebrimbor is, he's yelling at everybody. Meridiania is exasperated by his demands and points out that he has been acting strange. And then Celebrimbor asks Annatar to deal with the dwarves. Celebrimbor kind of starts to feel like he's losing his mind in this episode. He confesses that he wasn't able to find a certain hammer that he had left on his desk. We can see very clearly in the shot that this hammer is not on the desk. But then when Annatar asks, "You mean what hammer?" the camera kind of pans back over in that direction and suddenly the hammer is there. So Annatar is like magically gaslighting him really, really hard. Annatar also shows up in his new evil black outfit this episode that we've seen in a lot of the promo. He's got his different wig with the cute little hair bow, and he looks very creepy. I was a little bit bummed out because I was hoping there would be some kind of explanation for why he changes his outfit. It's kind of a bummer that Annatar only gets 2 outfits. Like, I wish that we saw kind of a more vibrant collection of outfits in this show. So Celebrimbor is neglecting all of his other duties in pursuit of making these 9 rings. He even says, until the 9 are complete, nothing else matters. There's an amazing shot of the Feanor statue with, unfortunately, no explanation as to when it was built. I was kind of hoping we would get to see maybe him building it at the beginning of the season. Annatar has basically decided to handle all administrative matters for Eregion while Celebrimbor is consumed by his work. So the people of Eregion are concerned because several of their soldiers went missing and only one returned, but he happened to be dead, and he had a message carved into his flesh. The carving says, "Where is he?" Meridiania is super troubled about this, and Annatar is getting a little too sweet with her. He's like holding her hand, and he bids her to keep it a secret. He takes her hand, and he asks if he can trust her to make sure the others leave Celebrimbor in solitude. I also noticed that Meridiania is starting to call Annatar my lord, which I think is meant to sort of represent him sort of taking ownership of Eregion while Celebrimbor is distracted. Annatar is being way too sweet with Meridiania, but I will only allow it because they seem to be setting it up as like she reminds him of Galadriel, so he's paying more attention to her, I guess. Eventually, panic overcomes Eregion as they realize that the orcs are marching upon them and they are under siege. There's this kind of odd shot where Annatar slices his hand open for some reason while overlooking the city. Maybe he's doing some evil blood magic. I don't really know if Maiar need to do that, but whatever. Annatar then comes to the forge where Celebrimbor is still kind of obsessing over his work, but he's kind of coming out of this state of mind and he's realizing something is wrong. He hears the siege alarm ringing. Annatar says, "Don't worry, I've got it all under control, everything's fine." And then he says, "You belong in here, my friend." He doesn't want Celebrimbor to leave to go outside. Celebrimbor then shoves Annatar into the wall super hard, and he says, "I've had enough of you telling me where I belong." Annatar then stops Celebrimbor by grabbing his arm, and he doesn't let him leave initially, but then he eventually lets him go. Annatar says, "Leave this tower now, and when the men of Middle-earth fall, I swear to you, every soul in the seen or unseen world will know that it was you who was the architect of their demise." And then he's like, "We still have 9 rings to forge." Celebrimbor's vision. After this, Sauron realizes that he can't stop Celebrimbor from leaving the forge, so he creates a vision for him to be immersed in when he goes outside. And it's this peaceful and very Edenic Eregion. This is kind of like the version of when he took Galadriel back to Valinor in Season 1. Celebrimbor walks outside, and he's expecting to see people running and panicking. It was also nighttime in the reality, but in this vision, it's daytime. So there are people painting, embroidering, basically thriving. It's a wonderful vision of Eregion. And Annatar says, "For centuries I sought to craft objects of great power, but I failed. The truth of it is, I came to Eregion, not because the Valar needed you, but because I did." Celebrimbor is like, "But dude, I can't make any more without mithril." Then Annatar suddenly has a package of mithril, pulls it out, and he gives it to Celebrimbor. But I'm not sure if this is actually mithril or if it was just a part of the vision, because unless I missed something, he was told no in Khazad-dûm. Annatar then says, "We are close now, Celebrimbor, so close to achieving what we set out to do. I give you my oath upon my immortal being, when the history of this age is written, the Silmarils, they will merit little more than a whisper. But your rings, the rings of power, they will be deemed the most precious creations in all Middle-earth. Do not turn back now at the very moment your boots are kissing the threshold." Annatar then presents Feanor's hammer to Celebrimbor and prompts him to use it alongside the mithril ore. Celebrimbor returns to the forge and the vision is ended, replaced by the reality of the city under siege. Annatar then observes the fear and chaos while smirking very evilly. He then stands up high on one of the towers with his arms outstretched. I'm not sure what he's doing with that, but it looks cool. The first catapults are released from the orcs, and thus the fall of Eregion begins. As I mentioned earlier, the emotional dialogue between Elendil and Miriel while he is in prison, ending with "the sea is always right," was a little bit of a rough moment for me. It was so close, and then they throw in something a little cheesy. It keeps happening. The sea trial lasting about 30 seconds was another example of the stakes in this season feeling too low in some ways. Anyone who is familiar with the Second Age knows the eventual fates of both Elendil and Miriel, so I wasn't worried. What is she going to die and then come back to life? But at the same time, I don't really feel this risk was presented as very high for even those who are casual viewers. Like, I don't know, it was just such a short scene, kind of like the Barrow Wights as well. I worry that with this show, they are trying to do too many things. I wish that we could have maybe left 2 of these plot lines out and done a spin-off or something, because a lot of the show just feels so crowded. The dialogue between Galadriel and Adar was really great, though. I love the way that the 2 of them are both elves who have been manipulated, deceived, and transformed by Sauron in different ways. There's a lot to explore there, and it's really interesting. The acting between Annatar and Celebrimbor is also starting to really ramp up. I think their relationship is getting a lot more intense, and even though it's sad to see Celebrimbor suffer, it's such good storytelling, and the way that they're doing it has been probably one of the best parts of the season. The Dwarven plotline has also been really strong. Overall, I cannot wait for episode 7. Let me know what you think. I can't believe that we are nearly there and that the siege has already begun. It's quite devastating.